We're New York. If there's something that creates more jobs and grows more businesses, we're open to it. Start a tax-free business at startupny.com.
Closed captioning brought to you by ChristianMingle.com. Find God's match for you.
As scared as I was, Christian Mingle made it so easy. He's my second chance.
Join ChristianMingle.com today.
Joining me around the table, CNN contributor Cornell Belcher, Stu Rothenberg of the Rothenberg Political Report, and Mattie Duppler of Americans for Tax Reform. Thanks all for being here. And be glad we're not in Wisconsin where it's really cold. Stu, let me start with you and just give me the base of 2014 in January for the midterms.
Well, Candy, where we're starting now is very different than what I would have said in October in the middle of the government shutdown. But where we are now is we're beginning the stretch, really, drive here. And the president's job approval numbers are down and somewhere between 39 and 42. The Republican brand is bad. But when you look at the generic ballot, that is, who would you vote if the election were today, the Republicans' numbers have popped a bit, and they're either even or up a couple of points. I think right now the House looks very difficult for the Democrats, and the Senate is definitely in play. The White House is going to have to change the dynamic, change the argument so that the election is about the Republicans, Republican extremism, Republicans being uncompromising. Because right now it looks like the election will be much more about the president, health care reform, and kind of the 6-year itch.
And an all-Republican Congress, Republican majority Congress, doesn't bode well for the last 2 years of the presidency. But I want to get you on how he changes that dynamic. I just want to back up Stu on the poll numbers. First, we have a CNN ORC poll, registered voters, choice for Congress in 2014, 49% Republican. 46% Democrat. That is like so wildly different from what we saw 3 months ago.
Quite a pop, yeah.
And the next one of registered voters, are you more likely to vote for a candidate who supports President Obama, 40%, who opposes President Obama, 55%? This is a dark way for Democrats to start an election year.
Well, one, polls, and I'm a pollster, but polls on the generic horse race a year out from the race is fairly useless. There's a lot of dynamics that are going to unfold in the next year or so. And I think when you look at the House, I mean, Stu is absolutely right. It's a tough climb for Dems. But however, given that Congress is at a historic low and you have a vast majority of Americans saying this is the worst Congress of their generation, the idea that any member of Congress is safe, I think is taken a little bit too far. What we do know is we have 20 seats right now where Republicans sit in that Obama won, that the DCCC is going to work very hard to sort of put in play. And we also know that from the grassroots level, Democrats are at the congressional level, at the DCCC and the DSCC, are also raising a lot more money than Republicans right now, and they have less retirement. They only have one Democrat retirement in the House right now. So Democrats do sort of like their odds, their punching chances at the House.
Well, wait a second, Cornell. 85% of Congress is safe. So don't say no, be safe. You know the way the districts are drawn. They're just 85% of them they're not competitive. So the question is on these competitive races, these competitive districts, and right now the White House has to change the dynamic because midterm elections are often referenda on the president. They're very rarely referenda on Congress.
Let me rejoin.
Let me get Mattie.
Let me rejoin because he went directly at me.
No,
you're absolutely right. But the same was true in 2000. The same was true in 2006. Now I will agree with you that the way these districts are gerrymandered right now make it almost impossible sort of to see mass turnover. And by the way, there's also a reason why Congress is so unpopular, because Congress right now does not, in fact, reflect the popular will of the people.
This is also why the House isn't that interesting, right? I mean, look at what's happening in the Senate. Democrats have to be on defense, and they have to run a very proactive defense, and I don't know how they do that. They have 21 seats that they need to defend, and we're about what's happened over the past couple of months. And what's happened over the past couple of months is at least that Republicans and conservatives have been consistent talking about what they don't like about Washington. And Democrats right now don't have much to defend about what's happening in Washington. You don't have Democrats who are out in front saying they're going to run talking about Obamacare and their votes on Obamacare. And, you were talking to Governor Walker earlier out in the States. Democrats don't really have a model to follow. They don't really have leaders at the state level who have proactive policy victories that they want to be talking about. Versus the Republican side, you have senators out here who have governors who have really set the stage for them. You've got Governor Walker, who has pulled Wisconsin back from the brink of bankruptcy. And disclaimer, I'm from Wisconsin, so I've been following that quite closely, and I am quite glad that I'm no longer there for that game today. But, you know, looking also at North Carolina, which is going to be a really tough Senate race. Governor McCrory there has done wildly popular tax reform, and that's going to set the stage for Senate candidates across the nation.
I've heard this. I heard this before about sort of you know, Democrats are down, Democrats down. I just heard a couple months ago in Virginia where, well, quite frankly, the president's poll numbers weren't great. Democrats didn't have anything to say. And you know what Democrats did? They won every statewide race in the state. And you know why they did it? They did it on the backs of a more diverse electorate that, by the way, wasn't supposed to turn out in an off year, and they did turn off in an out year. What Democrats are beginning to sort of learn up and down the ticket is that they do have to go after that Obama coalition and expand.
Let me ask you, because I do think the turnout, as we say, every election is really like who gets their people out. If you have issues like minimum wage, and if you have issues like long-term unemployment, and if the Republicans are seen as blocking those, that is quite likely to get the Democratic base.
Except, that's true, except this, that this election is not about some broad Republican theme. It might be, but it doesn't look it right now. It's not about the Republican governors. The Senate election is about the map, Candy. The map is West Virginia, South Dakota, Montana, Arkansas, Louisiana, Alaska, North Carolina. So the Republicans have these opportunities because this class.
Because they're in good territory for Republicans.
States. Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. I mean, look at Virginia. That is one good example of kind of what I'm talking about here. In Virginia, you had a governor who bucked what conservatives are about, voted for one of the largest tax increases in state history, and that's why when voters went to the polls, they said, well, there's no difference between the D and the R. Why would I vote for the guy who is inflammatory on all these other issues that really dominated that election?
Look, I'm going to tell you this, and I'm going to go out on a limb here, and a year from now we'll look back on this. Any sort of Republican who's going to run on the ideal that, as of today, we got 6 million people now with health care from Obamacare, if you want to call it Obamacare. And in the Washington Post ran a story, you know, a couple weeks back about sort of how in rural Kentucky, and another sort of targeted Senate race, rural Kentucky, you have rural farmers who, for the first time in their lives, had the dignity that sort of for their family of health care. If Republicans going to run in this next term on the ideal that I'm going to take health care and power away from 6 million Americans and give it right back to the insurance industry, I think Democrats like their chances.
Of course they're not going to run on that, but they're going to run
exactly what they're doing. They're saying they're going to run a different health. They're going to repeal and take it away.
Cornell, come on. They're going to run on.
I've been waiting for them.
More emergency room visits. So
I've been waiting for them to put for their plans to. If you've seen their plan, let us know because you're breaking news.
Well, they'll also be running on endemic unemployment and all these issues that Candy's been covering her entire show. And look at what's happening under the health care law. Employers aren't going to be hiring more than 50 people. In fact, they're going to be firing people if they're on that cusp. You don't have people who can work more than 29 hours anymore. That's an issue that's really stagnating the economy. And folks who are concerned about their economic well-being will be paying attention to that.
Economists are sad. You know, this is an amazing argument to me because we've been hearing Republicans make this for 2 years now. You know what the unemployment rate is, you know, 7%. We've had 47 straight months of job growth. The stock market ended at a record high last year. Your guest that was just on talked about sort of how healthcare costs are growing less than they ever have. Quite frankly, this ideal that the economy is in the gutter and the president hasn't done anything in the economy, Democrats should be running on this ideal that the president.
Then isn't it a little hard to argue that the long-term unemployment benefit should stay if the economy is so great?
Well, it's not only the long-term unemployment benefits, but also look what Republicans are standing in the way of. Minimum wage. You know what's vastly popular both in red states and blue states is raising the minimum wage. And Republicans are standing in the way and say, no, we're not going to raise the minimum wage when working families are struggling at a historic way. Oh, you know what? I like our chances to run against them.
Listen, it doesn't matter what the minimum wage is if you don't have a job. That is really the main thing that governors are focusing on, and they've had successful, it's been successful at the state level. Things like, I think North Carolina versus Virginia, when we're talking about these races, is a perfect example. McCrory there has passed the most proactive income tax reform, corporate and personal side, and has made that state the most competitive in the region when it has been the least competitive for years. So watching that as a template, you will see what pro-growth tax reform looks like and pro-employment reform looks like.
I'm glad you brought North Carolina because you know what? The grassroots in North Carolina, unless you get in a second. But you know what? This little thing called moral money is where you see an outpouring of sort of the grassroots in North Carolina the way you haven't. So they've done more to sort of generate enthusiasm and energy in North Carolina than I think we could have done with millions of dollars in advertising.
Two things. One, a poll question can test well and not be decisive in directing people's votes. They may say we should extend unemployment benefits, higher minimum wage, but are they going to go to the polls to vote on that? Chances are probably not. The second thing is this economy thing is really interesting. I mean, I think Cornell's right. There are data suggesting